Hey, welcome back to the Astrology of Things. I'm your host and professional astrologer, Sheena. And in today's episode, I wanted to talk a little bit about Neptune. Now, I don't have my script planned today. I really wanted to come on here and just talk off the cuff. Um, and I usually have a script planned because my Mercury is in Pisces, so my regular delivery and speech when I'm talking is not well organized. But for the sake of this video, I thought it would be the best to speak, without anything planned necessarily. So, if you don't already know, Neptune is, or Neptune rules Pisces in modern astrology. Traditionally, Jupiter rules Pisces, but if you want to incorporate the modern planets, which is either Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Neptune is actually the modern ruler of Pisces. And so if we apply that knowledge of Neptune and correlate it with astrology, we really start to understand some of the basic principles and foundations of Pisces. Um, Neptune in astrology, Neptune doesn't really get a lot of positive rap. Um, it's usually seen as a really negative planet, and some of the negative connotations or significations associated with Neptune is that it's just deceitful or deceitful. It is, it's a hallucinogen. It's correlated with drugs, and some drugs are hallucinogens. Neptune has been tied to, um, essentially having the wool pulled over your eyes, or we can see it as having rose tinted glasses. And so that's the gist of how Neptune has been portrayed. But if we really start thinking about Neptune, we have to see the positive benefits. Um, and I should say that no planet, no placement is good or bad in astrology. It's all about context. Context um, will change the meaning. I should say context. Adding context will shift the perspective of that particular planet. So let's say we weren't living on this earth right now. Let's say we were, in the dream space. Neptune would do pretty well in the dream space, because Neptune isn't based on that physical reality. Neptune is all about the spiritual world. But, we live on Earth, we live in this realm, this reality, whatever you want to call it. So Neptune isn't as accepted here. What is really accepted here is those mercurial things, or those practical earth based elements in this realm. But say we were in a different realm, Neptune, it would be seen in a more positive light. And if we think to when Neptune was actually discovered, which was in 1846, around that time. That was around the time that photography was also either invented or introduced. But Neptune is strongly tied to imagery, and symbolism. Um, and so, if we think of images like photography, or if we think of moving images um, in like cinematography, we can start to understand some of the principles of Neptune. So Neptune is all about that, giving giving us the ability to visualize. It helps us to visualize things that aren't real. That's I think that's the best part of Neptune. It helps us visualize things that aren't in our physical space. It helps us visualize things that aren't in our present. It helps us visualize the future. It helps us visualize the past. Neptune is really um, able to help us see the ability, the capabilities of what we're thinking. And I haven't done my research on this, but I know there are some people who can't essentially visualize things in their mind. So I know there's a term for that. I don't necessarily know what the term is. Um, but I can visualize things. If I have an idea, I can essentially build it in my mind's eye. And so in this way, I also see Neptune as vision, eyesight. If you think about it, our eyes replicate how cameras work, right? It's essentially the same thing. Neptune, Neptune is trickery or deceitful. If you look at any art, especially if you look into realism, the artist creates an image that looks real, but it's on a two-dimensional surface. It's not three-dimensional. It's not real, but the way that the markings have been made on the paper, it's looked to be real. So, in a way, the the deceit in Neptune can be seen as a good thing. Deceit isn't always a bad thing. It's all about the intentions behind it. Um, so, you know, that is how I'm really seeing Neptune, and starting to really, as I meditate on Neptune, I'm starting to build some of the positive relationships that Neptune has in our lives. And I also see Neptune as really a very spiritual planet. And it's, in a way, it's a higher octave of communication. It's a higher octave of communication. And it really allows us to connect with things that aren't in this physical reality that we're experiencing. Also, if a little bit more about Neptune. In mythology, Neptune is known as the god of the sea and the god of storms, and so it's strongly tied to this water element, and so water is very malleable, mutable, water is mutable. Pisces is mutable. Um, and so the mutability of this water is also Neptunian. It can go from liquid to solid. It can go back to liquid, go into gas, and then, in terms of weather or the atmosphere, uh, water in this gas form creates some of the clouds, and the clouds transfer from location to location. So, in a way, we can see Neptune as a traveler, but, a traveler on a higher octave. Um, and I'm seeing it really as the higher octave of Mercury. And I've been seeing a lot that in some of the writing or research that I've done, that Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Um, but I can see how that is, or how that association was made, but I can also see that there's an argument for Neptune being the higher octave of Mercury. Um, if we think, thinking is mercurial, um, but alongside of that thinking is that Neptunian nature, where we're, excuse me, um, alongside of that mercurial nature is the ability for us to, see those thoughts, see those ideas, formulate those ideas in our minds. It allows us to take those ideas and put it on paper. The writing, the drawing is very mercurial, but it also has that element of Neptune in it. Neptune allows the artist to build these realistic images, or, draw or paint these realistic images. And so, more on Neptune is, I started writing a list of action words that I could tie to Neptune, or these keywords that I associate with Neptune, because sometimes I see the planets as verbs, right? So if we saw Neptune as a verb, we could say, let's say we're starting out a sentence. We can say Neptune is all about visualization, imagination, facades, mirrors, reflections. This is actually, the reflection side of Neptune is very interesting, because if you look at let's say you're outside, you're looking into a body of water. Sorry, my neighbors are putting out the trash, so that kind of distracted me. But yeah, even just hearing my neighbors put out their trash, hearing all of the glass clinking together, makes me think of this Neptune being associated with things that are clear. So clear things like glass, water is clear, mirrors, don't think I would call a mirror clear, but it's reflective, so it doesn't have like essentially a color. It's reflecting what it sees. And so Neptune is a reflection of 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 images, reflecting images onto a surface. So the example I was about to go into before I got distracted was, if we are, outside in looking into a pond or a body of water, if we look into it, if the lighting is right, we'll see our reflection in the water. And so, this body of water being that reflection of us, even though water is clear, but the water is absorbing these colors, or it's reflecting the light um, in a certain way to create this image of us reflected back to us. And that is that Neptune. That's why we can't quite put our finger on Neptune, because, we don't know, it's essentially invisible and clear, and it's there for us to fill the void or fill that space. That's why I also see Neptune as a black hole or a void or a white space. The space is there for us to fill with, with our imagination. Another good example of this, I try to make analogies for things, and I don't know if they make sense, but I was thinking about this the other day, because, the whole mask wearing thing that we've been through, right? I would see people, well, I came across a new person in my, daily circle, and, they were wearing a mask, of course. And I never saw them take off the mask. I only saw the top of their head, so above their nose. That's all I saw, and of course their body. But I didn't know what their nose was like. I didn't know what their ears were like, because they had their ears covered as well. I didn't know what their mouth looked like. And so, the mask was essentially serving as that Neptune, right? The mask being there, I automatically filled in his face. I filled in his face because there was a void. It wasn't there. So my mind automatically filled in what he could possibly look. And that is very Neptunian. I'm projecting what I think, his face looks like, even though, my assumption of what his face looked like was completely different. And when I did eventually see his mask off, I was kind of blown away because I was very wrong. And when I did see his mask off, I was staring at him for I was trying not to stare, but I was staring at him because I just couldn't believe how I visualized his face looking in my mind was completely different. Completely different. I thought he was a younger man, but when he took off his mask, he was older than I thought he was. And I just find that so fascinating and such a great example of that Neptune, or some of the significations or how we can see Neptune playing out in our daily lives. So yeah, Neptune is, you know, it's deceit, it's hiding things, it's camouflaging things. But we always have to see Neptune as a negative planet. We don't always have to see it as a negative planet. And I challenge you to just make daily observations of how Neptune might appear in your life. And write it down, write it in a journal. I'm all about the astrology journal. I need to make an episode on astrology journals, but in order for us to really get acquainted and understand astrology, we have to make our daily observations and reflections on how these energies are presenting themselves and playing out in our daily lives. And that will make you a stronger, more thoughtful astrologer. And so I guess I'm going to leave it at that. And hopefully I'll make another episode that's more formatted on Neptune. But I did just want to come on here because Neptune had been on my mind. Especially last night, I was up late and I don't know why I was thinking about Neptune, but I was, and so I wanted to just share that information with you in an unformatted way. So yeah. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know, press like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. So yeah, until next time, I'll see you later.